Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Luke O'Malley. I'm one of the co-founders of Semgrep. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by two heavy hitters in the security community, two security titans, Caleb Sima and Julia Connect. Welcome. Thank you both for joining me today. Really appreciate it. So we've got about 40, I'd say 40-ish minutes, and I want to dive into how we empower our builders. So I've got a series of questions for both Caleb and Julia, and we'll leave some time at the end for everybody if you've got your own questions. So please be active in the chat. Feel free to drop questions there, and we'll either grab them as we go or we'll save time at the end. Maybe to just start off, I want to introduce our two guests. So Julia, I'll start with you. We were talking a little bit before this with your last name, which was Connect, which we thought was a great hacker handle, which is appropriate given that you've been in the security community for a long time. So you're currently at Netflix, and you've been there for about 5 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, going on 6. Time flies.
Good. Okay, well, going on 6, time does fly. And Julia is the senior manager for the security platform engineering team. She's also one of the B-Sides SF organizer. So particularly for the programs, is that correct? So if you were at, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I've done program at B-Sides for the last couple years, and then I tend to just do program. I don't think it's on my LinkedIn, but I do LabsCon program, and I've helped with AppSec program. So I don't know. It tends to be a thing people ask me for, and I enjoy doing. It's really fun to read all of the incoming
All of
CFPs
them.
and everything like that. It's
So
a
if
joy.
you enjoyed this year, for folks who want to B-Sides SF, if you enjoyed the keynote with Clint Gibler, I was told by Clint yesterday, Julia is the one who invited him for that keynote. So thank you for that. You're also an angel investor, and you were previously at Adobe. Does
That's right.
that captures thing? Awesome. Super happy to have you. And then Caleb is the founder, investor, kind of chief incubator of White Rabbit. Before that, and White Rabbit, Caleb, do you want to give us a quick blurb on White Rabbit? Because I see you at all of the events with all of the security Illuminati.
Sure. Well, my background is I've been a CTO and founder, CEO and founder, and then CISOs in multiple companies from Databricks to Robinhood. And I decided, to take that experience of both being a founder and a CISO and really help build next generation cyber companies that help solve the real problems that I had as an operator and me helping advise and create those. And so it is White Rabbit is a fund at which I write, a pretty phenomenal check, $6 to $8 million check into as a first check into a companies that really go solve those problems. And so, our goal is to build real companies that solve the problems for everyday problems for CISOs.
Love that. And I did ask Caleb, because I know everyone in the audience is wondering White Rabbit as a Matrix reference. He does not yet have a White Rabbit tattoo, but we want to help him change that with his first major investment return. So
You
thank
got
you
it.
so much both for joining us. Maybe just to kick it off, super impressive careers. You've been at companies that when I look at them, I feel like they've had a need for speed. It's groups and teams that have moved quickly. And I guess I'm curious from your experience, like what has the role of security been at those companies? So how would you describe it? And then does it differ, do you think, from kind of broader maybe industry trends? And that's for both of you.
Julie, I'll kick it to you.
Um, sure. So I think great question. And I think it has changed over time, and then in some cases changed with events. So early in my career at Adobe was kind of that major breach of 2013 that definitely shaped how security showed up and what the expectations were of security as a team and an organization. But I think, yeah, at Netflix, I think there's a view, security is a key member of the team, right? I think that there's Jason Chan talks publicly a lot about trying to be part of the solution and trying to make sure that we're contributing to the business and viewing ourselves as members of empowering and enabling the business. And so that ethos is there through the security team and has stayed there and been a constant part of Netflix. So I think the role of security there is enabler and protector, which is, I think, a really great role to sit in.
Is
I'll
that the
kick it to.
role? Can I
Sorry,
actually just ask real quick, was that the role of
sure.
security at Adobe as well, or was it a different maybe relationship with engineering with the organization?
I I think it was probably say still the role, but maybe took a little bit of a different shape, right? There's a lot of nuance there, but I think that there it was maybe reversed. I guess like to put it more explicitly, I think maybe protector and enabler versus enabler and protector.
That's
But that
is a
was
very
also years ago. I want to also note that too. I don't want to comment on like Adobe's current view of themselves.
yes. I appreciate that. Caleb, what about you? What's the role of security been? Both the teams that you've been on, the teams that you've led, and obviously the overall businesses that you've led as well as a CISO.
Well, I've been very purposeful in the types of companies that I've joined from a security operations perspective, and that I've always looked for companies that have something very critical to protect. I think it is a much harder job to be inside of a company where you don't necessarily quote unquote have regulations or forcing or pressure to ensure that you protect something of critical nature. And so I've always really tried in my when I've looked at these places, Capital One, Databricks, and Robinhood, they've all had very, very, very specific critical things that absolutely must be protected. And if it was
Mm,
not protected, it would be extraordinarily damaging to those companies. And so the benefit of that is that I've had the capability at where it's supported. Security is by default culturally supported, enabled. They have the pressure, they have the knowledge that says security is really important.
mm,
The downside to that, to some degree, is I've never really had to go down the road with many other CISOs that they have to go down is how do you position security in a place at where you can sell it, and that you have the ability to exercise the muscle of saying, how do I justify myself? How do I ensure that we become an enabler? Those are all things that I've had to do less of because of those companies that I've chosen.
yeah, I mean, and I guess that kind of leads into my question, really around like my perception from the outside is that you're both at companies that really value security, which is not always true, right? I think in some organizations, security can be seen as a cost center rather than a revenue driver or business enabler.
I would even say
Um,
most are in that position.
Most,
Yeah.
yeah. Which then my question is like, okay, so what's the difference here? Now, Caleb, you've articulated, if you're working in finance, there's regulation, the cost of a breach to the business, right? From customer perception, financial other could be huge. Like it makes a lot of sense. There's very high risk, and so security would be something that is maybe baked in or expected. Yeah, I guess maybe the question would be like, some of this also just seems cultural, right? So it's not just business. I mean, we could do the bare minimum, right? And my sense is that both the organizations that you've been at actually throughout your careers are not just doing the bare minimum. And I'm curious where that comes from. Is that the CEO really feels strongly about security, and so we're going to make time and space for it? Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. Where does that come from?
I'll start, but like obviously financial makes a lot of sense in the sense that
Yeah.
Capital One and Robinhood both have a lot to protect and a lot of motivation and external pressure to protect. Databricks, however, is a little bit of a different position. Databricks doesn't necessarily have outside pressure to protect.
Mm,
However, their goal is for the world to both store and process their data on their platform. And that is massive in terms of trust to be able to make customers do that, right? I'm basically saying every company, I want you to store all your data that's critical on my platform and process it on my platform. And although there's not financial regulation outside pressure, the trust that it requires in order to do that from other companies is extraordinarily high. And so the
yeah.
rigor that you must have and the ability to say, how do we enable that trust is an important part of that business.
Julie, what about you at Netflix? Not a financial company, not a fintech, not regulated in that same way, but I mean, the team is very public and I think has really been celebrated within the community for being very forward thinking and making heavy investments in security.
Yeah, I think it's a little different than Caleb, what you're talking about of the companies that you've been at. I think when I came to Netflix from Adobe, it was very different, right? Adobe has I think a different kind of footprint, a different kind of data to protect. And so coming to Netflix, I think what's what's really key about how Netflix security thinks about themselves is they really think about the threat model. We really think about like what is important here and how do we enable the business, right? And I think that the approach that has been taken, I guess at Netflix, it feels like it's a mindset, it's an approach. It is a how do we help the business move with velocity, and how do we take ownership of that? I think what really struck me when I joined Netflix, and I was seeing Netflix from the outside. That's why I wanted to join too, as well, this reputation, right? But when I joined Netflix is really the ownership that the security team takes in helping to deliver secure software, secure products, this kind of thing, right? There's skin in the game there from a supporting platform services perspective, from a how do we help people deliver in a way that is secure. I think the way that I've put it is like Netflix is the show must go on. And so if you want to help enable that show, like you have to be running alongside the business and helping to provide some of those critical services. So the paved road things that the security teams provide, and really truly it's not to be cheesy, right? But it is like an internal, like how we think about ourselves. And that's truly as how do we make this happen securely? How do we be part of that conversation around architecture? And then how do we support that from like actually we're staffing engineers who are going to build these critical services that then like we're driving adoption. So it's I do think it is it's a mindset about like what part we play in helping to deliver for Netflix.
Yeah, Caleb, I think you had a quick comment.
I was just going to say, if you don't mind, Jason Chan, I think, had some pretty amazing impact in Netflix in the sense that I think when you look at Jason and the story he tells, Netflix could have just been another company that looked at security as a cost center, and it would have just been the way it is in every organization. But Jason had the foresight and ability to realize what he was facing and turn security around to be an enabler, a branding aspect for the company, an ability to show what security can do to help the business. And I think that, Julia, you tell me better, but my perception and talk with everyone is that then internally, the engineers inside of Netflix saw what Jason was able to do and then realized the power and then really adopt it. It's a great story of being able to say, hey, you can just be a security team, or with the right leader, the right ability to turn things around, change that entire perspective for a company that probably would have been just lumped into everybody else if it weren't for that.
Yeah. Okay, so that I think this gives us up nicely to talk a little bit about the AppSec for Builders manifesto, and maybe I'll ask Lauren, who's helping out, is off camera. Maybe we can just drop the link in the chat as well for everyone who's tuned in. Julie, something that you said, you're like, hey, in some ways, builders are going to build, and so the security team is kind of trying to run alongside, enable them, remove roadblocks, help them go fast. And for me, that's the maybe like theme of the AppSec for Builders, or like the world that we're in today. So you've got ambitious teams. They're going to produce code. They're going to produce features. They're going to push the business forward. And it's kind of on us to figure out how to support them, because it's also the point of the business, right? Like we're trying to score goals here. We're trying to push out improvements and generally be creative. So in the AppSec for Builders manifesto, there's a couple different, it's like 7 different items, I guess, or statements. And I just want to focus on a few of them today. The ones that I'm most interested in is the idea of guardrails over gates, real world impact over audit perfection, which also you have both brought up already. And then finish with a little bit of discussion, if time allows, on AI, and specifically how do we use LLMs and agents generally to augment our security engineers and also our software engineers from a security perspective. So to start off on guardrails over gates, Julia, maybe can you just start? I feel like Netflix coined and popularized this term, so paved roads, secure guardrails. Can you just quickly walk us through what those things mean to you, how they're used internally, and then we'll jump to the next question.
Yeah, so paved roads it's a concept that we use in engineering, and it's kind of the blessed Lego pieces, if you will, and sometimes pre-built multi-Lego components that engineers can use to help them focus on the business pieces of their application. They're able to get kind of a good foundation and a good start. And so that's kind of the idea of paved roads. And then security's piece of paved roads is that we actually provide Lego pieces for the paved roads, and we do integrate with the paved road platforms and the things that are provided by, for example, our developer productivity team. That's a place where we engage strongly for kind of some high leverage. I won't go too much into that. And then the idea of guardrails is giving context, providing kind of in context guidance, feedback, but we're not blocking, right? We're helping you to stay on track and helping you not to go over the edge of the road, but we are not like standing in your way and blocking you from getting from A to B.
Cool. All right, so I think we've got our kind of definition. So both the paved road is these kind of Lego pieces that the team is providing, and then I think guardrails is like the nudges, the context to actually use them and maybe kind of make the right decision in the moment. One of the things that I really like that you shared is that, guardrails are things that you can go through a guardrail. So it's there to kind of nudge you back, but you can also make a choice, preferably an intentional choice, not to use it or kind of move on, which I think is one of the big changes where it's not. I talk with a lot of teams where they're like, oh my God, someone has the choice to ignore what we've suggested to them. Like, it's terrible. We can't do that. So it's a big change. Before we came on air, we said, "Hey, guardrail sounds like a great concept, right? It's a great thing to aspire to, but maybe in practice, it's hard to do. It's hard to actually get started on and roll out." Caleb, maybe I can turn the kind of the mic to you. Why is it so hard, and have you been able to roll this out at the places that you've worked?
First of all, when I first read this, this is a manifesto. And so the thing that first sort of keyed to me is, do I want to take a statement like guardrails over gates and embed that as a philosophy to my AppSec team? And my
Yeah.
first reaction to that was no. And here is why. There are, every company is different. And even inside of a company, there are areas that need to be more secure versus less secure. Like I'll give you an example. At Robinhood, your crypto environment is going to be very secure. And then your marketing environment will be less secure. Right. And so there are places where gates are absolutely necessary and are absolutely the right thing to do, where high friction to production or to building is the right thing to do because the risk is so high.
Mm.
There's plenty of places, like take, for example, gates are very, very good in certain areas. Like, for example, we don't want engineers submitting keys or secrets into their code. This is not a guardrail. This is a gate, right? Like there's no choice in the matter of if you're going to submit code, it will not use, you will not insert tokens or secret keys into that code.
Yeah.
Right? That is a gate, not a guardrail. And so I think there are contexts, situations, areas, culture at where gates are absolutely the right thing to do and is the things that you should be doing. And there are places where guardrails are. Like to me, guardrails are areas where I've used it. To give you an example, is like take Capital One. We used great guardrails very successfully here. We used it for two primary purposes. First, we had a problem at a very, very, very large scale that you can't just gate, right? So here's the example. S3 buckets that are public. So this is a great example where you're in a huge enterprise where this is happening on whims. You don't just put a gate and say, oh, I will then MCP this and then say everything inside this thing is then going to be a gate and you can no longer do S3 buckets. Because what happens, of course, is everyone's going to freak out. You build a process in place, you're going to get overloaded with tickets saying that they need these buckets to be public. And then
or they work around you.
Or they work around you, right? And so, like, you can't do that. So this is a great place in guardrails to say, okay, we'll allow the S3 buckets to be public. We'll analyze those buckets. We'll automate the communication to the owners of those buckets, and we'll train them over time. And then what you do is you train them over time, and those guardrails can then be used as an education to then finally get to a gate, which then becomes put in place after a series of training
Mm-hmm.
occurs, right? A great example, say, I'll put the bumpers up first. I'll allow you to mess up a little bit, and then over time, I'm going to enforce it. And then there will be no ways at which you can do this. And so I think like you have to look at the situation. You have to look at where you are, how you apply it, where guardrails are great, where gates are great.
Can I take a moment to defend myself as the person who wrote guardrails over gates?
Yes.
I Everything you said I agree with. And I actually, for me, only makes me believe more strongly in guardrails over gates. And my rationale here is I think by default we should do guardrails. What I worry about in the security community today, and a lot of the teams that I work with, is that their default is gates. So they flipped it around. So I think there's a time and place for both of these things. But if you're going to gate something, truly gate it, secrets is a great example. You just should not put secrets in code. Okay. Like we're not going to allow that. That to me is like the precision kind of airstrike versus, hey, we're just going to blanket, make a bunch of stuff. We're going to break your build. You can't move forward. I would much rather that you pick just a few things to do that with and then default to guardrails. And I totally agree with you. Context matters a lot. So you've got some critical projects, a marketing project or a dev project, whatever, like those things don't need the same level of security. So we should tailor, right, the kind of security requirement to the actual risk of the project. But I guess I would still push, like, I feel like guardrails is generally the right thing to default to. And then the burden of proof is almost on you to say, hey, this should be a gate. And there should be things that are gates. Like I completely agree with that.
I mean, I agree in the intent of what you're trying to accomplish. The intent is you're saying, hey, by default, let's ensure that we enable engineers to run fast, right? That is your intent.
Yes,
And
that is.
and you want them to do it safely. Like my favorite quote that I always use is our job is to allow our company to do unsafe things safely, right? And the way that you want to accomplish that is through
Mm.
guardrails, right? However, the reason why I disagree with guardrails over gates, I agree with guardrails as potentially a, hey, this is where we should start. But again, there's too many instances in too many parts of an organization where gates are required. And guardrails are not the right answer because of the sensitivity, because of the criticality, because of
Yeah.
where
Okay.
you apply those things. Like again, secrets going into code, there's no guardrails here. Now, what I'd like is I'd like a paved path where I immediately notice you have a secret going into code, and I've provided you a paved path that says, here is our key storage facility and the code to use it and the library that makes it easy for you. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
that's
So
nice, right? But that's not a guardrail, it's still a gate. You will use this library, this Lego block that we've provided for you, and you will not submit a secret into a code base, right?
Julia, I've seen some knowing nods. Help me out here.
It's the wisdom. Just kidding. No, I think that I guess I have a few thoughts here. I think that I tend to agree with guardrails over gates as a directional mindset that you want people to have on your application security team. I also agree with there are just things that shouldn't happen and we should stop them from happening because there's not really good outcomes from those things happening, and there's like a idea of we need to stop it. I think that the thing that we think about at Netflix is we try to be very risk informed about how we apply our controls. And then we try to do what we call right sizing risk rather than reducing risk. It's kind of a way that we talk about it, a way that we think
Hmm.
about it, which is let's really look at the risk and let's make sure that it's right sized. Secrets in code, the right size for that is 0, right? So that then becomes a gate. There are other situations, open S3 buckets, there might be a reason for like hosting marketing assets or something like that, where there is a open S3 bucket that makes sense for the context, right? And so then the control application might be a little bit different. Um, there's a concept that kind of I've worked on internally at Netflix with like a visual around like how, in what order should we consider different control types, where it's, preventative controls, secure defaults, absolutely no, there's a gate, preventative context, auto right sizing risk. I think this is something that Netflix has played with a lot too, where we will look at and observe actual behavior and say, like, if this thing's not used, we're just going to apply a better security policy for you. It'll help. You won't have to think about it. We'll shoot you an email and let you know that it's happening. You can undo it if you'd like to. But from what we're seeing, we don't see any reason that your policy needs to be this broad, for example. And then we'll go to like to intervention and saying like, okay, you have to take an action as a developer, as a member of the Netflix workforce. And then kind of at the end of that, we should end up with what we consider to be acceptable risk, right? Not no risk, because that doesn't exist at a business, but somewhat acceptable risk if we've gone through the exercise of saying, should this be a hard no? Should this be something we kind of like meet you with a gate that maybe has a door that you can open, but with a sign that says, here's the gate you're going through and what you should know about doing that? Or should we come and say like, we're just let us fix this for you, right? So I think that there's definitely guardrails over gates, but there's always nuance. That's what we're always here to talk about.
I mean, of course, but I have to have something juicy for marketing, right? So Caleb, jump in.
And the analogy to me is, the guardrails are training wheels, right? So your kid is getting on a bike and you put guardrails, your training wheels on the bike to help the kid not fall. But you are absolutely going to ensure that the gate going out into the street is closed. Like you're not going, the danger and the risk is high in the sense that I'm not going to guardrail you, allowing you to get on the highway, right? On the main road on your bike with your training wheels, nor am I going to allow you to go down that steep hill. Like there are gates, and because of the risk we know, to Julia's point, I think is high enough that you're just going to put gates there. And so, I agree that guardrails are great, and I agree with the philosophy of allowing the engineer to build. But saying guardrails over gates, is just something where I was like, I'm not sure if I want to fill that as a philosophy. I'd rather pull the philosophy as, hey, enable the engineers to get what they want done and find the right way to do it. I like Julia and Netflix's perspective around risk, right size the risk for the solution. I think that is something that I would want to emphasize to my AppSec team. Like, almost to Julia's point, I would replace this right size the solution to the risk is almost a better sort of philosophy or standard that I might go by.
Great. And it's like we prepped a little bit in advance. That dovetails beautifully into the next item, which is real world impact over audit perfection. And for me, this one does really try to capture, like, we need to talk about not the theoretical risk, but like the actual risk to the organization and what we should do. So let's see, maybe Julia, we can start with you here. Have you seen tension in your career between kind of real world impact and this maybe more theoretical risk, or kind of this audit perfection that teams might be after or have pressure to accomplish?
Absolutely, right? Like I think that there's we wouldn't be a fun career to have if we didn't have debates and go back and forth, right, on what's the right approach. And I think that I've definitely seen tension, and we will have the occasional debate club on my team where we'll say like, here's the approach that we're taking to identifying the risks that matter. And I will say at Netflix, that's really top of mind for us, is the risks that matter. And so there is a burden of proof on how do we make sure that, especially if we're interrupting somebody, we're interrupting them for something that does matter, that we would like them to stop shipping something for Netflix to get this thing fixed, right? So that's usually on the other side of the debate, right? And so how do we then prove that the things that we want to do are driving the right outcomes? In terms of audit perfection, right? Like I think that there is tension there, but I also think that if you have a defensible approach to something and you can say, here's how I got there, and here's why this thing matters, and here's why it is the right size for this problem, then I do think that there's good conversations to have. I have been lucky to not have to engage with what I feel like maybe is like unreasonable expectations on the other side. And there usually is a openness to be able to kind of have some of these conversations around okay, here's all the things that show up in our scan and our understanding of like, what exists on the box or something like that. And then we can say, and here's how
Yeah.
triage landed us with the things that actually matter and are actually important. Um,
It
so definitely tension, but I do think people are fairly reasonable, at least the ones that I've interacted with, in terms of like if we can lay out the approach and how we're thinking about it. And then also like I think see that on the other side of the table, the thing that we're balancing is like helping enable the business to get where they need to go.
Yeah, I think the theme that I'm starting to sense here, I'll take all the feedback on my current phrasing, the AppSec for Builders Manifesto. I think one of the maybe like foundational things is who is the burden of proof on? And Julia, it sounds like the way you're articulating it is the burden of proof is on the security team. And I'm curious, Caleb, if that maybe aligns with you, or it's um, I see organizations where I think security team is like, hey, you just can't do this. Like, prove to me why it's safe. Which is like default, we're gonna kind of gate or say no. And I wonder if there's a, hey, actually, we'll go in and we'll show you why this thing needs to be secure, and maybe the burden of proof has shifted more towards the security team. Is that, and maybe we can pull on this thread a little bit together.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say what you said versus this topic can be very, very different
Okay.
topics.
Okay.
If I may, maybe I'll start with this, the sort of audit compliance versus real, and then dive in. So like, I think there's two, I'll start with sort of a strategic answer around sort of compliance and real world impact. And then I think, give a real world example of what actual CISOs feel or security team feel on the street. Like I've actually always made the statement that your audit and your compliance is your friend. Their job is to effectively be able to say, because they have no view of you as a company, right? Their job is to effectively say, you're opaque. I need some transparency to validate that you are doing the best job that you can in order to keep your customers' data safe, right? That's their job. And then our job, of course, is to keep our data safe. The compliance and audit is about how do we meet in the middle, right? Like, how do we show that what we are doing is the right thing to keep the data safe? And then how do we provide evidence from that to these people so that they know you are there? The challenge is always, well, these guys expect everything to be done, quote unquote. And the reality is you're never really getting there done. And so, like, how do you sort of fill that gap and that need? And I think that, I've always been of the sense, and I think most security teams in the sense of having a good sense of saying, hey, let's accomplish our risk. If we do our foundations correctly and we build the right things of risk around that, we will meet compliance and audit where it is, right? Because if you do the right thing, you end up actually meeting compliance in the end. But the real world situation is this. You're now a CISO, you're at a company, you have a 6-person team, and your company needs to get these enterprise deals sold, and they need SOC 2. And you are not even close to being able to truly say that you can sign off on SOC 2. What do? Right? You now need to ensure that you've got the CEO, the company who have multi-million dollar deals who are waiting for SOC 2, and you need to get this job done, but your foundations are not necessarily there, and the risk that you want to prioritize is not there in order to get SOC 2 done. What happens? Right? This is the real world. And the real world is audit perfection absolutely trumps the real world scenarios, right? I want to go get secrets management done in my organization, but I need to go make sure we have DLP checked box on the compliance in order to meet this SOC or whatever compliance regulation I need to do in order to get the deal done. Where's the pressure from the CEO? Where's the pressure from the organization going to drive them? It's definitely going to be audit perfection over real world impact.
But it is
Is
also, but that
Yeah,
audit
yeah, yeah.
perfection in your scenario is coming from like a business imperative, right? It's not audit for audit's sake, right? You're still enabling the
Yep.
business on we need to get deals done and we need to be able to do that quickly. So we're not sitting there doing like 1 million SIGs or not going through every single deep dive with customers on a one-to-one. So yeah, I guess, and so maybe my pushback is like, it's not audit, it's like audit to enable the business, hopefully, at least, right? I don't know any
Well, yeah,
companies that
no
are
company,
going
I
through
imagine,
audit just for kicks.
yeah, no business ever wants to do an audit for kicks. Like, unless you are bringing in an auditor in order to assess the state of your organization to determine whether I should fire my CISO. That's probably the only, but like, like compliance regulators, like no company really wants the auditors to come in and do that. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But you have to prove to them that you are doing the job that they expect you to do, and rightly so, right? You have to show some evidence that you are doing this. And unfortunately, the gap between what they want you to show that you've been doing versus generally where you are in reality is always some gap. Um,
Yeah.
and so, Luke, I know you've dealt with this. You have to sell to enterprises, and they require proof of what do you do internally in order to secure the company. And what does your CISO do?
Yeah, we went through and we got SOC 2 and a lot of other fancy kind of
Yep.
audit perfections. Maybe the nuance from the folks I'm talking about, even for ourselves, is I think there's a way to get, I don't want to quite say audit perfection, but kind of like your audit pass, but implement things that are real security. And so I think sometimes there's this tension on like, hey, we need to do things that are kind of bullshit. Like it doesn't actually materially improve or change our security posture, but we need to get that checkbox. And when I talk with teams, I think there's a question on like, hey, how do I not do things motivated by compliance, but I do things that are motivated by real security that are going to help the compliance component. So like this comes up actually quite often, even with static analysis. It's not a hard requirement in a lot of compliance schemes, but it's kind of a spiritual, like spirit of the law kind of thing. So people will have it because, hey, I can help tell a better story to my auditors, and I think I'm going to catch issues early, and therefore I'm going to improve my security posture. It's like it's not really just purely for audit sake. And maybe that's what I'm looking for is like, hey, how do we do things that
Yes,
are really they improve our security posture materially and they contribute to audit?
you are correct. However, again, just going back to some real world, scenarios, by and large, most security teams are under-resourced and don't have time. So let me give you a real world scenario. You are in an organization where you need to pass audit and compliance, and it states, here's what we want. We want you to turn on detection and response. We need you to monitor your network. We also need you in order to comply. You need to have processes for IAM role privileges to ensure everyone is getting the right privileges. But yet you are stuck with two people trying to even deploy endpoint. You don't even have EDR or CrowdStrike on your endpoints. You don't even have, let's say, the right email spam gateways in place. You don't even have, let's say, S3 buckets or cloud controls, which these are the ones where real risks are being dealt into. So what do? Right? You've got two or three people. You've got to say, well, I keep, going on and turning. Well, here's what you do. You turn on guard duty if you're doing AWS. You check a box to say I have detection and monitoring. Okay, I'm done with that, right? Like I got to, oh, you need IAM and role and privileges. Okay, well, Okta and putting a ticketing system with Jira and then pushing it out. Okay, I'll check that box. You are now spending time in order to do compliance, even though you should be spending time going and getting your endpoint managed and
Uh,
secure. You should be spending time getting your cloud managed and secure, but you can't because it is a requirement that they define in these things that you must do. And you're, a three-person, four-person security team. You are now doing security for compliance sake, not for risk sake, but in order to enable the business. And so, doing these things, is having a detection response team part of a good foundation and hygiene? Absolutely it is. But is that really the thing I need to focus on right now at this
yeah,
stage
okay.
in my company? Right, right.
So then maybe let's try to keep adding some nuance here. There are things that you're going to have to do, and Julia, I'd love to get your take in just a second on kind of things you have to do and how you're making trade-offs here. But so there are these things that you have to do. I guess I would just seek to minimize the amount of time that I do those things. So it's, yeah, all security teams are understaffed, like chronically, horrifically understaffed. So yes, if I have to do this thing, then I'm going to kind of choose what we call this internally is like boring excellence. If it's not a like key thing that fundamentally changes our business, just do boring excellence. We're going to buy the thing that everyone else buys. We're not going to think about it too hard, like just kind of get the thing done. And then really invest our time in the things that have very high upside, which I do think in this case is the issues that have the basically like highest security impact, which I know better than an auditor knows for me, right? I know my security posture, my setup, my customers, et cetera. And so I will invest my time in the things that I think have the highest ROI from a security posture perspective, which may not be the things that the audit requires. So I just would seek to minimize the time, I guess, on the audit components. That would be maybe the nuance I would add. And Julia, I'm curious kind of your thoughts on this topic and lively debate.
Yeah, I think for me, for each of these elements of the manifesto, I picture like a slider at the bottom of it where it's like you have to probably, I think I love them as aspirations, I really do. But I do think that when you're talking about how does rubber hit the road and how do we operate as a security team, you have to actually explicitly go have those conversations, probably with your security team, where you're like, hey, our slider is over here right now, where audit is going to be our top priority. Maybe to kind of what we're talking about here is how to invest time. And that's going to shift over time, right? We need to get this audit right now. It's shifted over, and we're acknowledging that we're making this decision of we're seeking to implement this to enable the business. We're not able to do this other thing that we believe is more important. And then there's like an element of transparency, clear communication, and then a piece of, yeah, I even think acknowledging what you're calling boring excellence, or we're doing this. I hate to say to check a box, right? Because the box checking really does enable the business, and I think that realizing it and thinking about it in that way too does helps make it not feel like this is absolutely throwaway work, because it is something that's accomplishing something for the business, right? So I picture that there's sliders here, and if we're arguing that like the slider should be 80% of the way on real world impact and audit perfection as an operating state, as a steady state, as an aspiration for this team, I think that's fantastic. And then there's going to be times where you have to slide it over and be like, this is what we need to get done right now.
Yeah, that's great. It's great advice.
I love that. Yeah, I really, really love that. Which maybe just comes to when I talk with the team internally, and we're a small company, right? There's a lot of things that we should do. I hate the word should. It's like we don't have time for that. Like, do we need to do it or not? And I feel like, Julia, if I play back kind of your explanation, there might be things we need to do because they enable the business, right? Like, yeah, we do actually need to get the checkbox. That is important for the business. So it's not a should to do, it's not a nice to do for the auditor. It's like, no, we actually do need to do this. It's aligned with the business. And so like we're gonna do it. But it's rigorous in thought. And maybe that's the thing where I'm just kind of trying to push on, if you have a requirement, if you have a gate, if you have any of these things, like you should be able to defend it and explain it. And I worry that a lot of teams, the default is, hey, we're just going to say no. And again, it's kind of like burden of proof and everything else. Like we're going to default to kind of not enabling. And that's maybe where I take more concern or more umbrage. Oh yeah, I know we are a few minutes over, so I have to land this bird. Julia, maybe we could start with you. Just looking forward over the next year, what are the kind of cybersecurity threats that are keeping you up at night? We'll close with maybe those things. Yeah, we'll close with that. So Julia, what's keeping you up at night over the next year in the security world?
Oh, let's see. I think the things that tickle my brain that we're thinking about. I hate to probably repeat what a lot of people are already thinking about, right? But like with kind of the onset of more and more AI, we are leaning into using AI tools strongly. Our data is going into a lot of different places because it helps, right? To get the answers that we want, we have to ship data off into places that we don't know if we trust, but we have to kind of put some of these things. So I think the sprawl of information and data, the access to data, those kinds of things are just increasing. It was already high, but it's increasing more. And then also like we're shipping faster, right? So like, are we able to actually keep up with these things, with the right guardrails, with the right context, while we're shipping more code more quickly. And then also our data is landing in more and more places, right? So those are maybe the two things that I think about that are maybe different than they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I imagine your team is not getting significantly larger to deal with the significantly larger amount of code that's being produced in the world.
No, right. And so I think it's interesting because we're also figuring out how to lean into some of those productivity gains that we can get from leveraging things that we can buy as well.
Yeah, cool. Caleb, what about you? What's keeping you up at night?
I'm going to piggyback a bit on Julia as well, where I think that we are going to have a major problem with prompt injection as we push more and more and more AI-enabled agents, tools. It's running over into everything, and prompt injection is just a problem that is unsolvable today. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more exploits. It's going to be like SQL injection was in the 2000s, where it's going to be almost impossible to find both software and sites that are not vulnerable to this in some form or fashion. And I don't think people really understand and realize the impact of that coming forward in the next year or two. And I think we're just starting to see where that's going to really rear its head. So I think that's going to be a big, impactful problem in the next year.
Yeah, I heard a lot about this at RSA, and it seems like really nobody has an answer yet on how to secure prompts, deal with prompt injection, everything else. So
nope.
be
SQL
very.
injection was easy in comparative, right?
But it was easy. It just finally left like the OWASP top 10 #1 spot after God knows how many years.
Yeah, so think about prompt injection, which by the way has no ability to you can't input filter. You can't output filter this, like it is the English language. And so this is like a very, very fascinating problem to see what happens here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. We're out of time, unfortunately, for audience questions, but it seems like there's a lot more time that we could all spend together debating these topics, given that we made it through 2 and just scratched the surface of 2 of 7 principles. So thank you so much to everyone who attended and joined. Thank you so much. It was fantastic to have you. We look forward to continuing the conversation. And yeah, please check out the AppSec for Builders manifesto and reach out if you have any questions or thoughts. We'd love to discuss it more. So Caleb, Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.